Hello, everybody. Welcome. We are nearly 400 people gathered here today from all over the US, as well as the UK, France, India, and Iran for this presentation on the earliest known use of indigo, pre-ceramic textiles of Peru by Dr. Jeffrey C. Spritztozer. This webinar is co-hosted by designers and artisans and the International Haji Baba Society. So before we begin, just so that you can enjoy the presentation, if you look on your screens, on the top right corner, you will find three little dots. If you press on those dots, you can choose what kind of view you would like. And I suggest you choose gallery view. That way you will not have all of us appearing and taking up space on your screen. So my name is Kartika Odine. I have to go down. And I'm the founder of Designers and Artisans. Apart from designing fine textiles and crafts, I also conduct online lecture series. They are on textile design and history. I'm a textile designer and professor. And I also run the Designers and Artisans Textile Club, which is what this talk is part of. My goal is to make textile scholarship accessible to as wide an audience as possible. You can find more information on my website. It is here, www.designersandartisans.com. If you like, you can take your phones and take a screenshot. That way you'll have it. And you can also reach me at kartika@odine.net. Now, the International Haji Baba Society is a rug and textile appreciation society with collectors, enthusiasts, and scholars, all dedicated to the understanding and appreciation of textiles. They welcome new members, and so you can access membership forms on the website. And so again, here, this is their website. It's www.ihbs.org. And now let me go on to introducing you to today's talk and Dr. Spritztozer, of course. Now, the pre-ceramic site of Huaca Prieta in Peru is famous for producing some of the world's earliest cotton textiles decorated with complex, colorful designs. And recently, indigo was detected in a 6,200-year-old striped fabric from the site. This discovery marked the earliest known use of indigo in the world. Dr. Spritztozer will tell us not only about how the fabrics were excavated, but how they survived over 6,000 years, their conservation, and how their structures, designs, and pigments were analyzed. Dr. Spritztozer is the textile specialist for the Huaca Prieta Archaeological Project. It was directed by Dr. Tom Dilhay, and he is the one who led, Dr. Spritztozer is the one who led to this discovery. He is Assistant Research Professor of Anthropology at George Washington University, Research Associate of the Institute of Andean Studies, Berkeley, Cosmos Club Scholar, and also Vice President of the Boundary End Center, which is an archaeology research facility and retreat in Western North Carolina. And there he edits two of its peer-reviewed journals called Ancient America and the Research Reports on Ancient Maya Writing. Dr. Spritztozer has studied Andean textiles for over 20 years, and his PhD dissertation is a study of the Paracas textiles, dating to circa 850 to 300 BC from Cerrillo's Ica Valley in Peru. He is also an authority on quipus. So for those of you who do not know about quipus, they were these colored and knotted string devices that allowed Andean people to record information. They did not write this information, they recorded it with these knotted string devices. And he co-curated an exhibition called Written in Knots, Undeciphered Records of Andean Life at the Dumbarton Oaks Museum in Washington, DC, back in April 2019. We are also honored to have Dr. Tom Dillhay today with us as part of the panel. And so I hope that he will be available to answer some of our questions. So please write your questions in the chat or the question Q&A box. There are two little icons that you will see at the bottom of your screens. Please write them. As we are so numerous, Betsy Platt of the IHBS has very graciously agreed to help me and to moderate the questions. So she will be grouping the questions by topic. And so we will try to get all your questions answered. So now it is my real pleasure to welcome Dr. Jeffrey Splitztozer, and I'm going to stop sharing this screen and let him come on. Over to you.
Well, hello, everybody, and I want to first thank Kartika Odene, Austin Doyle of the International Haji Baba Society, and Betsy Platt, also from the Haji Baba Society, for the invitation and all the hard work they did to get this presentation going. I'd also like to thank Tom Dillhay for joining us as a panel discussant. This afternoon, we're going to discuss the textile findings from Huaca Prieta, a site that was occupied during the pre-ceramic, a time that predates the use of pottery in the ancient Andes. For some reason, my screen is not advancing. Okay. Huaca Prieta was first excavated from 1946 to 1947 by Junius Bird, who believed the site was a large pre-ceramic midden because of the abundant deposits of burned materials and a lack of pottery. From 2006 to 2012, Tom Dillhay and the late Duccio Bonavia excavated Huaca Prieta, determining that the site's earliest origins lie in the late Pleistocene, and that it was not a midden at all, but a temple mound that was in use for more than 3,000 years. Sadly, Duccio Bonavia died of a heart attack at Huaca Prieta while he was carrying out the last phase of field work there, and this talk is dedicated to him. Huaca Prieta is located on the north coast of present-day Peru. It is situated near the mouth of the Chicama Valley on top of a natural platform called the Sangaman Terrace, looking directly over the Pacific Ocean. And here's Huaca Prieta, and this is the coast of the Pacific Ocean. Huaca Prieta means dark, a dark sacred place, and the mound's dark appearance is the result of massive amounts of burnt offerings associated with rituals that were practiced over its 3,000-year history. And here you can see the difference between the natural terrace and the dark features of Huaca Prieta. In fact, Tom Dillhay states that feasting associated with burned offerings and probably mortuary rituals appear to have been a primary activity at Huaca Prieta. The soot from these burned offerings was incorporated into the asphalt-like construction material, which is unique to Huaca Prieta and consists of sand, shell, charcoal, and salt. I was allowed to work with the excavators, with the excavation team for only 2 days. And this is a picture of the team that I worked with at a site I'm going to, if I can, I'm going to go back up. So we are excavating at a place called Paredones, which is right here. So Huaca Prieta is here, Paredones is located here. It was a residential area, and this team, which consisted of the principal investigators, Dillahay and Bonavia, also consisted of dozens of specialists, graduate students, and excavators, most of whom of the excavators lived in the nearby village of Magdalena de Cao. Like I said, after 2 days, I was politely asked to go back to the lab. I'm not sure what that says about my skills as an excavator, but I was able to see how the textiles were taken from the ground. And I've seen other excavations, and this one was done right. Most of the time, textiles, when they're excavated, are essentially shoveled out of a unit and sifted, and all the fiber materials become kind of caught in a pile, or like a big dust bunny that's then usually bagged and separated later. At Huaca Prieta, they carefully excavated every fabric, and those that were associated with one another were collected together, so their provenance and their associations were not lost, which is really was ideal for looking at associations in time. Excavations also determined that the temple expanded upward over time as layers were added one on top of another, forming an almost waterproof barrier that preserved the fabrics in between the layers. Like I said, the layers were made of almost a concrete-like material or an asphalt-like material, and they formed a waterproof, pretty much a waterproof barrier. An analysis of these sequences of layers showed that the site was built in 5 different phases, roughly 5 different phases. Phase 1 consists of 2 parts: an early period when maritime foragers lived on the terrace from around 13,720 to 13,260 years before present. And then there was a pre-mound occupation phase, still in phase 1, which lasted from about 8,979 to 7,500 years before present, when maritime foragers and incipient gardeners lived there. This would be where phase 1. At this time, the shoreline was about 2 kilometers distant from what it is now, and the site was situated next to a lagoon at the ecological junctions of fertile wetlands juxtaposed with diverse semi-arid lowlands and coastal estuarine and maritime settings, marine settings. In other words, it was an area where 3 different environments intersected. It was an ideal place for people to live at that time. During phase 2, beginning around 7,572 years before present, the first mound construction began. Subsequent mound building phases 3 through 5 continued until approximately 4,107 to 3,455 roughly years before present, when the ritual and ceremonial use of Huaca Prieta ended. During phases 2 through 5, the region was becoming warmer and more arid, and after 6,470 years before present, the lagoon began to fill in with riverine silts that were due to El Nino events. The shoreline also moved closer as sea levels rose due to warming temperatures until about 4,500 years ago, when geological, environmental, and ecological conditions were much as they are today. The abandonment of Huaca Prieta corresponds with the beginning of the pre-ceramic, with the beginning of the initial period, which is a time marked by the introduction of ceramics to the Central Andes, and that was around 4,800 years before present. Dillahay and Bonavia excavated more than 1,000 fragments between 2007 and 2009, and I was able to analyze approximately 825 of them. A relatively small number of the fabrics were associated with burials located in the sunken plaza at the top of the mound, shown here. But the majority were found as bundles or packets, which, according to Dillehay, were always found at the corners of the zigzag footpaths on a ramp. And this is where the ramp is. And so the ramp was what gave access to the top of the mound. And this ramp had zigzag pathways on it. And all of the textiles were, other than those that were associated with burials, were found at the corners of these zigzags. Dillehay suggests that the bundles were offerings, perhaps related to processions, changing directions, or simply access to the mound. By the way, this shows the layer. For those of you who might know, this is William Conklin, who's standing in front of one of these cuts right here. He's looking at this side of the, or at this part of the ramp, and then this is a photo that shows how the textiles are still literally, coming, they're sticking out of the sides of this cut. There's so many textiles still there at the site. In order to better understand the practices involved with making these bundles, I photographed, drew, and documented the steps involved in each bundle's construction as I took them apart. And here is an example of a drawing of a bundle. But now this is an example of a drawing of a bundle. Sorry. Here you can see how the photos and drawings work together. So these are my drawings of this bundle, obverse, reverse, and the steps that were involved with opening it up. So my process of opening goes this way, while the process of making the bundle would have gone this way. And so what essentially by studying patterns found in multiple bundles, it became evident to me that they were prepared in 4 distinct actions. The first was cutting or ripping or tearing one or more textiles to form a fragment. I think this was a process of ritually killing the fragments. And so here are 2 different textile fragments, both made of weft twining. And then the fragments were soaked or poured, or either liquid was poured on them or they were soaked in a liquid, possibly seawater, because a lot of the fragments are just coated with salt. And then the water was squeezed out of them, and you can see how they're bunched up. And then they were, in the 4th step, they were folded or crumpled together to make a bundle. So here they're crumpled, and then they put them together to make the bundle. Again, the obverse and the reverse side. And this is typical of all the bundles at the site. But there was change over time. The earliest fabrics, which come from phase 2, consisted of a single fragment made of weft twining, like the one shown here. This extends into early phase 3, this practice. Bundles associated with the later part of phase 3 and early phase 4 usually included 2 different weft twine fragments or multiple fragments of a single fabric. In this case, we have 3 pieces of the same fragment that appear to have been torn off of it. This piece shows evidence of extreme trauma to it. All of the elements are out of alignment. By late phase 4 and early phase 5, bundles are often made of a single piece of looping or netting. In this case, it's a piece of knotted netting. And this is a bundle made of 3 fragments, 2 of which are shown here, of figure-8 looping that made a bundle. And this is from phase 5. During late phase 5, however, bundling practices radically changed. Oh, I'm sorry, this is another this is another one from phase early phase 5. By late phase 5, the practices changed radically. Bundles now consisted of a single textile made of multiple pieces of plain weave that were crudely stitched together. This specimen here, this is the bundle, this is it open. This specimen consisted of 9 fragments of balanced cotton plain weave that were stitched together like a patchwork quilt, but without any apparent order or design. It was then folded into a bundle and tied with a cord. Once the bundles were open, they were cleaned by the project's conservator, Arabel Fernandez, who's shown here in this bottom photo. She stabilized these textiles by vacuuming them and brushing the dirt off them, and they were also flattened as best she could, and then placed in acid-free wrapping paper, which you can see some of that here, and then placed on mounts, conservation board mounts, and then these were all placed in boxes. The photos show the textiles from the bundle before and after cleaning. So this is before, after, before, and after. She did a great job. I want to also point out that you'll notice this fragment appears to have been torn when it was made into a fragment, while this textile seems to have been cut. You can see the straight edges. This had to have been done with a sharp instrument. You know, was this intentional? Was this a type of dualistic type of practice or dualism? Some of the textiles were extremely wet and dirty and could not be safely stabilized simply by brushing and vacuuming. They had to be dried first. And when they came out of a unit, most of these textiles, by the way, came out of a unit that was backfilled by Junius Bird in the 1940s, using material from another unit that he dug but did not save the artifacts from. Once these fabrics, as you can imagine, dried, they became extremely brittle and would never have survived any time out of the ground for long. Further, there was no hope of analyzing them. Audubel tried brushing them, but literally the fibers would come off with the brushing. So they had to be cleaned in some other way. So Tom Dillehay was able to take about 350 of these textiles and bring them to the United States to the Archaeological Center at Mercyhurst University in Erie, Pennsylvania, to figure out a way to conserve them. The director of the Archaeology Center at the time was James Audavazio, and the perishables team was led by Jeff Illingworth, shown here. They were also responsible for studying the basketry, matting, and cordage from the site. Illingworth developed a process to safely remove salt, carbon, sand, and clay using a solution of sodium hexametaphosphate and deionized water. During this process, fabrics were mounted in flexible polypropylene mesh to keep them stable during the process, especially the soaking process. Magnets were used on the larger fabrics, as you can see here, in order to keep them flat. The sodium hexametaphosphate solution was prepared with deionized water based on the weight of the textile. So here you can see he measures the amount of material, pours it into a jar, adds deionized water, and then pours it into a vat. The fabrics were then immersed in the solution and gently agitated. After the salt, carbon, clay, and sand were removed, the fabrics were freeze-dried in a vacuum cleaner. And this is a picture of a fabric going into the vacuum cleaner. This, combined with the use of deionized water, reduced fiber matting, keeping the yarns fluffy and the fabrics flexible. Residual materials, seen here, those materials that were washed out of the fabrics, were also freeze-dried in vacuum chambers, labeled and saved. You can see they marked the name of the specimen number for each one. Then this is the large another vacuum chamber at Mercyhurst, with a much larger one where they were able to freeze dry the water. And then here you can see the individual residuals being bagged and labeled to preserve basically all of the materials that were washed out of the fabric. So nothing was lost. Those of you who are archaeologists will be happy to know that. The results were generally excellent. In many instances, washing brought out colors that were otherwise hidden. Here you can see a fabric before it was washed. You can't see any blue in this, but once it was washed, you can see it, or it's actually a blue-black in this fabric. So I'm not sure it's indigo, as you'll see in a little bit. After the textiles were stabilized or cleaned, cleaned in Mercyhurst or stabilized by Otterville, I analyzed them using specialized data forms that feed into a relational database. The forms are designed to allow me to infer the choices that spinners and weavers made at each step in a fabric's operational chain or life history, from making to using to discarding of a fabric. The top of the page, at the top of the first page, as you can see here, I record the condition of each fabric or bundle, which provides clues to the way the fabrics were used, repaired, and discarded. Other sections on pages 1 and 2 record qualitative and quantitative data about length, width, number of webs, superstructures, yarns, unspun fiber, knots, etc. And there is also a section at the bottom for notes. These data forms allowed me to record information about all types of fabrics, including those made of a single element, which are yarns and unspun fibers. Here's single element, or a single set of elements, such as braiding, or two or more elements, which are in this section, such as twining or weaving. I am also able to record attributes of interworking, including those for supplementary, complementary, and/or discontinuous elements. They pretty much are a general form that I can use with almost any kind of textile. Page 3 records attributes about warp and weft selvages and quantitatively describes bands and stripe patterns. The last page is reserved for drawing the textile, noting its dimensions, design, selvages, fabric structures, etc. Here you can see a typical textile and its corresponding drawing. The forms also allow me to be consistent while making multiple measures of each attribute, which in turn allow me to infer the skills of a spinner or weaver and the decisions they made while making fibers and textiles, such as whether to use single or two-ply yarns, Z or S twist, twining over straight or alternating pairs of warps, what kind of edge finishing to incorporate, such as knots or loops, and whether to interwork over one, under one, etc. Patterns in these choices revealed to me the weaving practices that might have been shared by a community, that were unique to an individual, or perhaps were produced by specialists. The results of this study were published in the volume edited by Tom Dillahay and published in 2017 by the University of Texas Press, called Where the Land Meets the Sea. I will summarize some of my findings now. There's just not time to summarize all of it, though, but still you're going to hear a lot. Of the 825 fragments analyzed, 368 are weft twining, which constituted the largest group of fabrics by structure. The majority of elements, both warp and weft, are two-ply S-spun yarns with a final Z twist. Although some fabrics have decorative elements that are Z-spun S-twisted. In other words, they're using, the majority of yarns are S-spun Z-plied, but they also are using counter-twisted yarns as patterning elements. Most of the twining is regular weft twining with Z twists and wefts interworking regular pairs of warps. In other words, this is an example of that, where you have the twining always involves two wefts because they circle the warps, and regular twining is where you have two wefts that interwork pairs of warps that run straight through the fabric. A significant number of twine fabrics have wefts that interwork alternate pairs, which is on the far right, of warps, meaning the warps split and divide. And some fabrics have both regular and alternate paired warping in the same web. Other twine fabrics encountered use counter twisting, where some weft shots have an S twist. In other words, this has an S twist. If you were to look, it has the shape of an S, where alternated by a Z twist. So S, Z, S. Design or pattern was frequently added to Waka Prieta textiles using structural and suprastructural techniques as well as color. Complementary warp patterning was also used as seen in this example. I know these are complicated images, but basically what you're looking at here is the fact that there's two warps of a different color that are switching from one face to another, creating a two-faced fabric. Some of the finest textiles from the site were made with crossed warp patterning. This is an example of what is called the woodland style, in which a supplementary warp creates a pattern on one or both faces, as you can see in this diagram. This specimen combines what is called the condor and geometric styles of crossed warp patterning. The geometric style, which is illustrated here, is made with warps consisting of a pair of differently colored yarns, which you can see up here, that gradually cross to form a geometric design, forming a two-faced fabric as shown in this diagram. The center of the fabric is made out of what is called the condor style. By the way, this is an image of the actual textile fabric of the fabric that is in 4 different pieces labeled here, or 5, A, B, C, D, and E, that I was able to piece together. Based on their structure, I was able to figure out where they belonged. And this is a diagram of that, showing the image that this pattern created. So in the condor style, shown here, a complementary set of warps, each a different color, visibly cross each other, creating a design and making a two-faced fabric, something like warp substitution and weft-faced plain weave. And here you can see these were probably 2 different colors. Today you cannot see any color, but it's just been most likely been washed out. But you can see that the warp that crosses over basically blocks out the warp that's under. So you end up with a fabric that has the same image on 2 sides, but in the opposite colors. This particular fabric also has 1 intact warp and 1 intact weft selvage, in case you're interested. By the way, the name condor style was coined by Junius Bird, who along with Melissa Skinner at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, discovered it in the famous condor textile shown here, which is on display there. The condor style twining appears late in Waka Prieta's occupational phase, and it represents really the pinnacle of fabric production at the site. The yarns are the finest and best worked. Many twine fabrics have weft patterning, as seen in these 3 examples. I know this is a difficult slide to view. What's important here is to note that these fabrics incorporate both S and Z twisting. Some of them here you have Z twisting, and in others there are S twisting. In the second fabric, it has a thick supplementary weft that creates a textured effect. Often these thicker wefts are made of a different material, such as honko or milkweed. In the third fabric, there are 3 shots of discontinuous weft twining between each continuous weft shot. And it's too hard to see in the photo here, but you can see in this drawing the continuous wefts with 3 discontinuous wefts in between. Other weft patterning techniques included weft-faced twining with supplementary wefts, In the top fabric, an eccentric weft, you can see here, and it created a chevron. And here's the square shows one of the parts of this chevron. While in the middle fabric, it also has supplementary wefts. It's not a weft-faced fabric, but these supplementary wefts are interworked in a more free-flowing way. And at the bottom of the fabric, supplementary wefts were added between ground wefts, as seen in this diagram, and have a non-regular working order. In other words, the ground wefts interwork pairs of warps regularly, but the supplementary wefts interwork groups of 3, 4, and 5. Excuse me. Some Waka Prieta twine fabrics have ground elements with knots that appear in them that seem to have tied superstructural elements such as raw fiber, down, or other materials that were either removed in antiquity or did not preserve. And here, what I've done is I'm showing you the photo of the fabric, and then I've drawn in from my drawings where supplementary elements were added or where knots that seem to have tied objects to the fabric up here. And you can see they don't, many of the knots don't seem to have much of a pattern. Occasionally I'm showing you the supplementary wefts and their, how they were interworked. It shows that some of them were almost embroidered. Junius Bird believed that the twining at Waka Prieta was produced on a frame like a toba loom that is still used in South America today. The toba loom has a circular warp with interlocked ends, like the one shown here, and the one I made as to replicate one of the pieces of twining found at Waka Prieta. By the way, the orange yarns are are colored with ochre, and the blue are colored with indigo. You can see the ends of the warp wrap around this stick and are interlocked. And I don't know if you can make this out in this drawing, but basically the warps essentially go around, back, they interlock, then they go back, around, interlock, back. And so you end up with a fabric that's twice as long as it is when it's off the warp, the loom, or the frame as it is when it's on the loom or frame. I believe Bird was correct in his assumptions. I encountered 14 fabrics with looped ends that suggest they were indeed attached to frames, while numerous other textiles appear to have been cut from a frame, leaving a fringe. The specimen seen here, however, right here, is the smoking gun. It still has remnants of interlocks that were formed when warping the loom. And here you can see this is one of the warps, and here's another one that's interlocking with it. Here's a second one, and then this is an interlock. The yarn is twisted on itself, so you can't really see how it's an actual yarn that is interlocked, but it is. The second most numerous type of fabric structure is plain weave. 127 fragments of plain weave were analyzed. The majority of it is balanced or slightly warp-faced simple plain weave with S-spun single-ply elements. However, Waka Prieta plain weave is anything but simple. Some of the plain weave has stripes here, and other has, and sometimes it has bands. This particular piece has both stripes and bands. And some of the some of the plain weave has discontinuous wefts, which I hope you can make out here. The wefts are not continuous. It's not tapestry, but it's definitely a discontinuous weft weave. The textile on the left is a warp-faced plain weave fabric made with natural white, blue, and gold and yellow warp stripes. This particular fabric is the phase 5. It's the phase 5 fragment that you saw from the bundle that previously. It's made of simple 1x1 plain weave with S-spun single ply warps and wefts. 3 of its fabrics of its 11 fabrics have indigo blue on them. And this final example of plain weave, again, is not simple. It has it's plain weave with plain weave derived float weaves. And this is not a great diagram, but it kind of shows you how there's a float. So basically what you have is, this is the selvage right here. I think it's a weft selvage. This could be a warp selvage, where you have your wefts coming in the first form, a 1-by-1 plain weave followed by float weaves. It creates a pattern of crosses on the fabric. Knotted netting is the third most frequently encountered structure. 40 fragments of knotted netting were analyzed, all of it made of cotton. It came in two general types, one with an open mesh like fish netting made with yarns and cow hitch knots. Like in this example, this is a photo of the textile. This is my drawing of it from my notes, and then this is a structure diagram of netting with cow hitches. But keep in mind, this has been rotated 90 degrees from the drawing here. What's interesting to me is that this net consisted of 3 different webs, a main one which is almost complete, and then a second one that was attached to one selvage, and then a third one which seems to have been attached where the other selvage might have been. This to me suggests that this net was a circular net, maybe attached to a frame that was cut down one side in order to, before it was ritually deposited at the site. The other type of netting has a smaller mesh size and is made of thicker yarns with sheep bends instead of cow hitches, like the one shown here. The structural analysis of its yarns and knots, however, revealed that it is made of 3 strips that were connected with simple linking. So here you can see the linking that's connecting the strips, and this is my drawing showing you have 1, 2, and 3 strips. It also has 3 different kinds of yarn structures that I've made it in different colors here. So you can see this fabric either looks like it was originally patterned, or these different yarns represent extensive mending of the net. It does show other areas of mending. So I think these are probably areas that were mended. Again, I'm interested in looking at the life history of objects. And this is very interesting to me because it's showing how these objects were used. There were 39 fragments of figure-8 looping. Bird encountered multiple varieties of looping, including simple looping. However, all of the looping excavated from 2006 to 2009 was figure-8. The specimen shown here is cotton figure-8 looping with an S-twist using 2-ply S-spun Z-twist yarns that formed a diamond grid pattern with both compacted and open spaced looping. So here you can see the spaced looping and the compacted looping. This is the diagram of it. And these are what you're looking at here is just some of the many measurements I made, of the looping for my data forms. Again, don't worry how complicated this image looks. What I want to get across to you is that this specimen of figure-8 looping has a blue-green stripe that runs its entire length. It too shows extensive repair. All of these little boxes are showing repairs that were made, except this box, which is showing the structure of the looping. All of these objects are extremely, they're not only repaired, but they're they're very fragmentary probably from extensive use. There were 251 specimens of cordage, yarns, unspun fiber, and other non-interworked objects. The majority seem to have had a ritual function, like the 2 wrapped specimens on the left. The leftmost object is a folded lock of human hair wrapped with a cow hitch knotted netting. There's also some vegetal fiber stuck in it. The middle object is a wrapped stone, and it is tied with junco, which is a grass-like sedge in the genus Scirpus. The specimen on the right is a spool of tan cotton S-spun single-ply yarns that are wrapped around a spindle made of reed. At this point, I want to begin our discussion of color. I know you all have been waiting for that, but I promised Kartika that I would give an overview of the site and the excavations and that textile analysis. So Waka Prieta textiles have a remarkable color range given their antiquity and included red, golden yellow, blue, black, white, natural white, and tan and brown. This slide shows two natural shades of cotton, a white or a natural white and a tan. Most of the darker browns, there was a dark brown color, but those yarns are very fugitive and most of them have disintegrated, leaving spaces in the textile where they had been. So here we would have seen stripes of dark brown. I know this because I can still see remnants of them occasionally in between the twined wefts where they still haven't completely fallen out. White fiber, bright white, was produced with milkweed. It was usually plied with natural cotton to form a speckled effect, which you can see in this fabric. See, the cotton is plied with milkweed. Usually the milkweed is unspun. Junius Bird suggested there were two local species of milkweed, both vines. However, the only species of milkweed native to Peru in South America that I could find is Asclepias curta. I'm bad at pronouncing Latin names. Curta savica, also known as bloodflower, shown here. I grow and harvest bloodflower and find it is very easy to separate the bast from the dermis in the pith, producing a strong, although from mine are a kind of greenish fiber, although basically one side is green and where the other side is a bright white. And this is just a diagram of where you can see this is the epidermis. These are the bast in the dermis. These are the bast fibers, and they separate very easy from the outer dermis and from the pith in the center. The green is coming from the phloem, which does not separate well. But the Waka Prietans, I believe, were using the fiber like you see here. Now let's turn to pigments. Red and golden yellow yarns showed high levels of iron when measured with X-ray fluorescence, suggesting the colorants are ochres, which are natural iron oxide clays. Black yarns were not measured with XFR, but I believe they were also colored with ochre. And this is an example of black ochre, and I think this might be ochre here. Frequently, the fabrics were used as bags that held ochre in them and rubbed off on the yarns. My own experiments with ochre on hand-spun cotton produced vivid, color-fast colors, which makes sense when you think of how difficult it is to remove rust stains, which are also iron oxide, from your clothing. The best results, however, came from soaking the yarns in seawater, right here. And seawater worked better than distilled water or even just salt water. It had seawater was really what was required, which is interesting since Waka Prieta is near the sea. Next, I dipped the wet yarns in powdered ochre and mixed them thoroughly. And then after drying them, I removed the excess pigment, and you can see they're very bright, colorful yarns that are color fast. At the site of Paredones, Dillehay found a stone grinder on the right, or mano, with red pigment stains, suggesting it might have been used to process red ochre. Junius Bird also encountered cobble grinders with red stains on them that he believed were involved with ochre. This suggests that ochre is likely at least used probably for the red pigments. I believe it was used for yellow and black too. So 55 textiles were identified. Now let's move on to indigo, because I know this is what everybody wants to know about. So 55 textiles were identified with blue pigment, which is indigo. And I suspect that many more fabrics have indigo that I was unable to see due to the darkened condition of the unwashed fabrics. As most of you know, or probably know, the oldest known use of indigo was found at Huaca Prieta in the textiles shown here, which dates to approximately 6,200 years before present calibrated. This date is based on carbon dating of materials from the same floor that this textile was found in. Junius Bird suspected that the pigment was indigo, but he was never able to get a positive identification. I submitted a sample to the chemistry department at Mercyhurst University, and it too came back negative. This stumped me, but I'll return to this later on. So I finally was able to convince Jan Wouters to agree to testing 8 samples. I submitted them to the Department of Conservation and Restoration at the Institute of Museum Conservation in Lisbon, Portugal, where he and Ana Claro managed a state-of-the-art lab. And they tested all 8 specimens. Using a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, they found indigotin in 5 of the 8 specimens. But this specimen was a control, so I didn't expect them to find indigo in it. The 2 samples, though, that I did think contained indigo, you'll notice have very dark, I hope you can see this, they have very dark, almost black yarns. They're a blue-black, which I thought was indigo, but now I believe is probably black ochre. Although Wouters and Claro proved that the Huaca Prieta textiles are the oldest known fibers dyed with indigo, this quote from Dominique Cardone suggests that people in other parts of the world were using indigo at least as early. She says that it seems to date back to the dawn of history. And I think she's probably right. The source of the indigoid dye at Huaca Prieta was most likely Indigofera subfruticosa, shown here on the right. However, no indigo-producing plants were encountered during excavations. In addition to Indigofera, indigo is found in a number of plants native to South America, such as these shown here, which are tropical plants. All of these plants contain indigotin, the main blue dye component of indigo, and indirubin, which is a structural isomer of indigotin. And I'll explain all of this in a moment. While none of these plants are currently grown on the north coast of Peru today, their distribution 6,000 to 7,000 years ago is unknown. Remember, the climate was quite different at that time. Or the region around Huaca Prieta was quite different. Indigo is dyed in vats, which is a process that does not require high temperatures, and so it could have been done without the use of ceramics. Indigo vats may have been prepared in watertight baskets, stone bowls, hides, or gourds, all of which were found at Huaca Prieta, and I will discuss them briefly here. Although I don't believe watertight baskets were probably a likely source, because usually watertight baskets are made of coiling, tight coiling, and no coiled baskets were encountered at Huaca Prieta. However, stone containers could have been used, although the 2 stone containers that were encountered, one by Dillehay and one by Bird, were both associated with burials and seem to be too small to serve as a vat container. Hides could also have been used as an indigo vat container. Both white-tailed deer and wild guanacos, or domesticated llamas, remains were encountered at both Huaca Prieta and Paredones. Deer materials were associated with phases 1, 2, and 5 in context of in Huaca Prieta context, and guanaco or possibly llama was encountered in phases 2, 3, 4, and 5 at Paredones. I believe that while hides could have been used, I believe the most logical container for making indigo vats would have been bottle gourds. They were excavated at the site from, I believe, all periods and would have been large enough to contain a small indigo vat. And here you see a bottle gourd that had been used as a float for a very large net. And these are, so these would not have been used as indigo vat containers, but I don't believe this gourd would have been used either, but this, you can see they're quite large and they would have been big enough if they had wanted to use them. So the chemistry of indigo. The blue of indigo comes from, as I mentioned, indigotin, which is the final, the molecule, the blue molecule that makes the color. But indigotin is actually not found in plants. The substances found in plants are what are called glycosides, or sugars, and these are here. And one of them is the major one is indican. And the most productive of plants, and the plant that has the most indican is Indigofera. The production of indigotin requires two steps. First, the glycosides, or sugars, are broken down into indoxyl and sugars by enzymes that are excreted by bacteria that are already present on fresh plants. Indoxyl is a yellow-green color and is called white or leuco-indigo. Next, the indoxyl is oxidized to mainly form indigotin, which is blue, but it also can form indirubin, which is a purple or a pink. As this process goes on, when the formation of indoxyl, the sugars ferment and turn into acids, but the indigotin is only soluble. The indigotin is only soluble in alkaline solutions, which is with high pHs. So an alkali is needed, such as potassium carbonate. Many people today use thiourea dioxide, or thiox, but that would not have been available to the Waka Prietans. So how does indigo stick to fiber? Indigo is a substantive dye, which means that it does not need a mordant to adhere to a protein or cellulose fiber. Adjective dyes require mordants to be color fast against washing, color, light, and wear. Mordants form strong ionic bonds between dyes and protein fibers, but this does not happen with indigo. When cotton or another natural fiber is dipped into a solution of reduced indigo, it does not form a bond. Instead, some of the indoxyl penetrates, inside the fibers, between the cellulose and protein molecules, depending on the fiber. When the dyed fiber is then exposed to oxygen and converts to indigotin through oxidation, it turns to its insoluble form. The indigo is, when that happens, the indigo is trapped within the fibers and is color fast, but any indigotin on the outside of the fibers may rub off, that's why your blue jeans fade. And this process is called crocking. This is why the Mercyhurst chemists, remember I told you I'd get back to this, didn't find indigo in the samples they tested. And that's why Junius Bird didn't find it. The process involves dissolving in order to find indigo, you must dissolve some of it into a solution that can then be read by the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer. And there just simply wasn't enough indigotin in their equipment. It was not sensitive enough to measure the indigotin in the sample. Jan Wouters, though, has state-of-the-art equipment that was able to detect it. We do not know the methods used by pre-Hispanic people to dye with indigo, since most recipes in use today involve processes that were introduced by the Spanish with some modifications. That being said, a method published by Hugo Zumbul in 1979 presents a simple method for direct dyeing with fresh Indigoferous fruticosa plants, which I believe could have been used. In this recipe, fresh leaves are macerated and placed in a tub of water along with potassium carbonate or potash, which can be made simply by pouring water through hardwood ashes and boiling off the water, creating a salt. Yarns are added to the vat. So here's the maceration. Here they're adding the potash and the leaves. And then they add the yarns. And the vat is set out in the sun for a full or half day, after which time the yarns are removed and washed and producing the blue dye. By the way, I have not yet tried this method. I have done experimental work with Emily Kaplan at the National Museum of the American Indian, where we were using gourd vats. But I suggested we use urine as a vat liquid, and it didn't work. But we were using indigo for a fruticosa. I think we're planning sometime in the future to revisit this experiment, and I think this would be the recipe that we will use. So stay tuned. For any of you, by the way, who have never seen yarns coming out of an indigo vat, it's really something you must do sometime or see online, because it's really magical how the yarns turn from a yellow color to green, yellow of the indigo to from yellow to green to blue, right before your eyes. And many ancient people considered the process magical, and in fact, they restricted who could even do indigo dyeing. So in summary, Waka Prietans were the first people in the world known to have mastered the complex biochemical processes involved with dyeing with indigo. They used indigo along with ochre, natural cotton, and milkweed to decorate their twined, knotted, looped, and woven fabrics. While most yarns were S-spun with a Z-twist and 2-ply, and most fabrics were made of weft twining, the diversity of colors, yarn structures, fabric structures, and decoration is impressive and suggests a vibrant community that encouraged experimentation. It also suggests the presence of multiple communities who likely practiced weaving traditions that were slightly different from one another, yet all recognizable as Waka Prietan. During the last phase of occupation, Waka Prieta weavers developed the condor style of weft twining, which represents some of the finest examples of twining ever made by ancient people. Yet because they did not have pottery, animal hair, pottery or knowledge of mordants or animal hair, they were not yet using camelid hair. They were unable to dye with other readily available dyes, such as flowers, which are much simpler to use from a chemistry perspective. Thank you very much. And here I'd like to thank some people. You can read this over. Well, I guess we can start taking questions. Also, I wanted to again, I'm dedicating the talk to Duccio Bonavia and one of our favorite dogs, who is named by the community of Magdalena de Kaitu, which I found later means yarn in Quechua. So I thought that was appropriate.